Friends, in a few moments, we're going to begin the service for Mrs. Maryles. If you have a cell phone, I ask that you take a moment or two to please turn them off. Appreciating the service of gratitude.
It is our honor to call upon the Zion's time.
Mizmo de Dover Adonai Roi Lo Yachso Binois Desha Yabitzaini Almei Menichois Na Aleini Nafshi Yeshoi B'Dom Chaini B'Mar B'Tzedek B'Man Shemoi Gam Ki Eilach B'Geit Zalubas Lo Yireru Ki Ate Mudi Shiftecho Mishantecho Heimi Nachmini Karach L'Funai Shulchan Neged Zoiroi Yishant Hashem En Roshi Koisi Revoyo Achtoi B'Chesed Yidufini Koi Meichaya V'Shafte B'Beis Adonai V'Oilach Yumen Es ist kaum mit ihm zu Bruch mit Nina Bücher, Mutach wo Leibal, Beschuva Leyakso, Masi Kai Beloiru, Koi Meichayel. Oshe Zeme Fischne Matras Bachevitz Kapeyu, Hoyso Kani Soiche, Mimecho, Tubi Lachmo, Matukum Boi Leilu, Latiten Teref Lebeso, Bechoik Menaro Sel. Zamu Musudra Tegechayu, Mipi Kapel, Nutu Kudem, Choge Beoz Masna, Vatiyame Tiro Yesel. Tuamu Ki Tevsachru, Lo Yichba Beleilu Neiru. Yudel Shulch Bakisha, Bachapel Tom Kifula, Kapo Pasa Yuni, Yudel Shulch Lavion. Loisiru Lebesim Mishulik, Lebesim Lubishunim, Navadam Osisolo, Sheish Baguman Lubishum, Noid Bashunim Bala, Beshifnem Ziknei Uretz, Sudan Osisol Atimko, Bachador Nosno Laknani. Oiz Behuda Lubisha, Batiskak, Yom Achron, Hier Pascal Bachachmo, Besoidas Chesed Al-Shainu. Zoifi Alicha Isbeise, Velachem Atzis, Loisochem, Kuma Beneva Yashriu, Bala Vehadalum. Rabbi is Bunis und Sifoyu Bat Ulis Al-Kidunu. Sheke Achein Neva Yofi Ishi Ras Adoino, Ikitis Halo, Nilo, Mikuyedel, Alio, Bashunim Asel.
Nearly 10 weeks ago, I received a frantic call from Ari Maryles. His mother, who was with him in the hospital caring for his father, had suddenly, without warning, taken ill. Despite the immediate intervention of the medical staff, they said that there was nothing more that they could do. There was no hope. I can't possibly imagine the shock that Ari and his siblings must have experienced. But I can imagine the community shock, because I and so many others felt it. Because Mrs. Ann Maryles was a mainstay of our community. Everyone knew her. And together with her husband of 64 years, may he live and be well, Ann Maryles was involved and she was engaged. I grew up with the Maryles children, and Mr. and Mrs. Maryles were members of my shul, and she was always upbeat, positive, and strong, which may not seem so special and may be words that you hear about so many others. And yet, it was special because all that she had endured. I'll never forget the first time I heard Mrs. Maryles' story. She was sitting shiva, and my wife and I came to see her. It was just the three of us in their home. And she told us of her childhood in Mainz, one of the three great cities that were the cradle of Ashkenazi Jewry. And she told us how her parents Mordechai, Hashem Yikon Damam, sent her and her siblings on a kinder transport in hopes that they would find safety from the Nazis, Yivach Shemam. But her transport never made it to England. Instead, she stayed in Holland through the war, first in a children's home, then a Jewish foster home, and ultimately cared for by two non-Jewish women who they referred to as the Tantes, who arranged for her to be hidden on the farm of a Catholic family. After the war, she made it to New York to her aunt, her mother's sister, Sarah Billet, because, as she would say, that was the closest she could get to her family, to her mother, to her parents. And then she moved to the south side of Chicago, where she davened in the shul, same shul as another survivor, Izzy Stark, who suggested that she meet his friend, a fellow survivor from Poland by the name of Jack Maryles. And that was it. Together they built a family. They had 4 children, 22 grandchildren, and 24 great-grandchildren so far. But even more, together they built a reputation as a family who others could always count on. A family who would always help others, but without any fanfare when they needed the help. And a family that could celebrate and bring joy. They were at my wedding, and they co-sponsored one of our Sheva Brachot. They were involved in every organization you can imagine, attended events and dinners galore, all evidenced by the range of people here today and the people who wanted to be here today. But without question, she was the Eshet Chayil, who helped her husband, cared for her family, and set the tone for their home. A home filled with chesed and Torah and warmth. In this week's parasha, we read of the mitzvah to be mekadesh shem shamayim. As the pasuk relates, v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. And yet before the pasuk issues that command, the Torah warns us, v'lo techalalu et shem kodshi. Don't profane my sacred name. Why was it necessary to have both a negative and a positive command? Said the Sfas Emes that in every Jew there is a sacred spark, a nitzutz mishmo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that spark will continue to exist as long as a person is careful shelo la'asot ma'aseh shekulo chulin, never to do anything that is entirely devoid of kedusha. V'lo techalalu. Last night, in preparing these remarks and in remembering Mrs. Maryles, I decided to watch some videos of her telling her story, something that she began to do in recent years. And I listened once again to her talking of how she recited Shema secretly at night, of the identity she was able to retain despite the falsehood that she had to live, of the yearning to reconnect with family, and of the care she extended for those who saved and cared for her. Each of those acts preserved the sacred spark that was born within her. But even more, after the war, that spark only grew brighter and brought light and life and goodness to others. Never did I ever hear a word from her that was anything but encouraging. Never did I ever see her mourning her losses or even the sorrow of the daughter who was so very ill. Never did I feel that that spark was gone, because it wasn't. Until February 15th, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to change her path, allow her family to prepare, and ultimately to today, when she will return for one final trip to the land that she cherished and that is home to so many of her heirs. Hers was a life of miracles, of inspiration, born of hard work, and of so many just rewards. And hers was a life so very well lived and so filled with beauty. And so while 10 weeks ago, the doctor said that there was no hope, for all of us who remember her, there will always be hope, because she taught us all how to live lives filled with beauty and hope. To all of her children, to Barbara and Renan, Joel and Rachel, Sandy and Levi, Ari and Esther, to her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, to her nieces, nephews, and to her many, many friends, and the children of her friends. Words cannot adequately describe the loss of Hannah, but Mordechai Yisrael. But words must continue to be told. Her story must continue to be told, and deeds must continue her legacy. On behalf of us all, I asked Hannah bat Mordechai Yisrael Mechila for anything we should have done to help her, but didn't. Shouldn't have done, but did. May she be a Mitzat Yosher for us all. And may HaKadosh Baruch Hu grant the Maryles family the strength that she had to cope with this loss and move forward with her Nitzotz Mishmo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with that spark as their guiding light. And now it will be our honor to hear from Rabbi Moshe Francis, followed by Rabbi Zev Cohen, followed by Ari Maryles, and then Yehuda Maryles. Rabbi Francis.
There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, Ki ish asher imoy tenachamenu, kein anoichi anachemchem. Just like a person whose mother consoles him, so Hashem says, I will console you. The Mitzvah explains over there that it's the derech of a mother to console her children more so than a father. When the matriarch of the Maryles family is Nifta, the bulwark, the rock of Gibraltar, who will provide comfort and solace to the family? Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can now fulfill that role. We see in our generation that Yisayimim who lose parents at a young age are often emotionally scarred by the traumatic experience. Anne Maryles was snatched from her parents at 8 years old and lived disguised as a non-Jew and raised some of the time by Goyim. Despite all of this trauma, she was a bastion of emunah and a pillar of strength to herself and her family. As mentioned by Rabbi Matanki, when she was a young child, she was taken to church at 8 years old by her non-Jewish family, by the non-Jewish family that cared for her. And Ari told me that at the moment when she was sitting in church, that's when she said Shema Yisrael. Do we know the power of one Shema Yisrael to save a person from the Sitra Achra, from the forces of Tumah, and to preserve the Neshama Tahira of a Yid? We live in an age when the roles of the traditional male and female roles are blurred. Maryles was a paragon of the Jewish wife and mother as it existed for generation from the time of the Imahos. If there's one word perhaps that could describe her best, that word is selfless. She was totally selfless. The Nefesh HaChaim says, in the introduction to the Nefesh HaChaim, it quotes what Reb Chaim Volozhin would always tell his family. This is what my father always told me. The essence of a person, everything about a person is lo la'atzmai nivra. A person was not created for himself. Rak l'hoyel lachrini. Only to help other people. Kechol asher yimtza b'koychei lasos. He should do everything within his power to help others. A person has to live his life other-directed, directed towards other people, and not think about themselves, but only to think about what they can do for other people. I doubt whether Maryles ever read these words in the introduction of Nefesh HaChaim, but it was inbred and inborn within her. She lived her life to support her husband, to take care of his health, and to enable him to learn and daven. At the moment she suffered a massive stroke, she was in the hospital caring for her husband. Jack was one of the first Balabatim to come and learn at the Kollel. He learned with Rabbi Cohen. They even took Rabbi Cohen to Florida to learn with him during vacation time. I don't know why they didn't do the same for the Rosh Kola. Jack learned at the Kollel for many years, all with the support and encouragement of his wife. Ari Maryles and all of his children, male and female, spent countless years learning at the Kollel, and Maryles took great pride in this. She treated her grandchildren like her own children and forged very close relationships with them, more like a mother than a grandmother. Chaim Maryles, who's a great Masmid, Ari's son, he doesn't leave the Gemara for a second. And yet, when his grandmother took ill, he was on the next plane. He was here in Chicago to spend some time with her. She practiced B'nai Banim Harei Kabanim. She lived in modern-day Chicago, but she was a holy relic of past generations. Tehei nishmas tzur b'tzur hachayim, bila hamavas l'netzach ha'mocha adinei lehim dibba miyal kol panim.
Mepharshim say, in the beginning of Divrei Yomim, Kolev had 6 names. Kolev had 6 names. 5 of the 6 names referred to the time that Kolev refused to join the other Meraglim. I was thinking that when we give a person a name, or we add names during a person's lifetime, it's based on a defining moment. Not all people have a defining moment in their lifetime. Kolev had a defining moment when he refused to follow 10 great Yidden who unfortunately sinned, and he stood up and said no. Klal Yisrael, we have a word in English. It's called a survivor. Sheres HaPleito. It's a word that other people out of our religion, out of our community, perhaps don't know of and definitely don't appreciate. The Kleitenberger Rebbe lost 11 children in the Holocaust. Rebbe Meir Bloch, Rebbe Katz, each one lost 11 to 10 children in the Holocaust. So on Mashim Gedolim, we can't understand it, but we can perhaps feel that they had the wherewithal, they had the tools, they had the kaitis to be able to survive. Levin Zatzal would always read the note that was found among the notes of Rebbe Meir Bloch when he found out about his family's death, Rahman al-Islam murder. So we can understand great people, tzaddikim, had the ability to survive. But what's with the quote-unquote pshutei am? What happened to the regular people? What gave them the craft to survive? It's an incredible yesod from Rav Hutner Zatzal. Rav Hutner Zatzal, who had incredible insights, said the following: in Klal Yisrael, there are Gedolim. You know what Gedolim mean? The great people, the leaders, the tzaddikim, the Kleitenberger Rebbe, Rebbe Meir Bloch, and Rebbe Katz among them. But in Klal Yisrael, those who are not Gedolim are not referred to as Ketan. Interesting concept. We don't have Gedolim and Ketan. He says we have Gedolim and Pshutim, a Pashut Yid, Emunah Pshutim, Pshutei am. Says a footnote like this: everything that a Katan has, a Gadol has. L'chal Masayim Monah. Whatever is contained in the Katan, the Gadol has in a greater quantity. But he says whatever is contained in the Pashut is not necessarily contained in the Gadol. Two different paths. One called the Pashut, one called the Gadol. A Pashut Yid, Emunah Pshuta, Pshutei am, is a person who is able to survive without cheshbonos, without lofty concepts, without going through the sugya of Emunah and Bitachon, with all of the svarim, with the chayvus al-vavis. The Gedolim had all the svarim, they had the sugya, they understood the complexities. The Pasha the Yidden understood that we go back. We survive. And we continue. That's what we refer to when we say the word in English, a survivor. We mean a person who was able to, incomprehensible, but a person was able to survive with their emunah pshuta. I'm a little bit of an exception, perhaps. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents were in America. I grew up with no relatives who were survivors. And the first people who I really befriended who were survivors, the Maryles. And both Jack and Yvonne Chaim, Mr. Maryles, Yvonne Chaim, Mrs. Maryles. That's how we referred to them growing up. The last 40 years, growing up in Chicago, the last 40 years. They exemplified the concept of Emunah Pshuta. Now, Emunah Pshuta does not mean that they kept Emunah Pshuta until the war was over, and then they went right. My wife and I were once walking on a Shabbos in West Rogers Park, and we met the Maryles. I can't tell you over what happened. Not because I don't remember it. I remember it very well. It was too personal for me to say over. But I will tell you the following. That in that story, in that moment, she mentioned a challenge, a change that took place in her life, for which she could have had kindness. She could have had kindness. And she said it with such pashtus, how she's continuing despite the change. Despite the change, she's continuing. And I can say that what was mentioned by Rabbi Tanki and Rabbi Francis both showed how she maintained this change with such dignity and at the end with such ahava. Rabbi Francis briefly mentioned Florida. I want to mention what happened with a little bit more detail. In the Koilo, 39 years ago maybe, the Shir started with a chavrusa, Gilbert Gertzfeld over the show. Then we added Yibon L'chaim, Shmuel Graham, and then we called at that time the two Maryles brothers, Yibon L'chaim too. Then after learning for a number of years together, I left the Koil and I became a Rebbe in Skokie Yeshiva. And they asked me if I would come along with them, and they went to Florida, for those people who remember the Caribbean Hotel. If I would go along with them, so I said, Florida. I mean, I was in Yeshiva then, it wasn't saying that we were off. Skokie Yeshiva had off at that time, we were to Florida. So I called my Rebbe, Yeshiva Shlita, and he said, "Do you want to learn every day?" I said, "They want to learn every day." Unheard of. Who goes to Florida and wants to take along their Rebbe? They weren't taking me along, so I should read. I mean, they wanted me to relax, but that wasn't the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah was we learned. We learned twice a day in the Caribbean Hotel. We went twice a day. That's called people who from Pshute, Emunah Pshuta, Pashat Yidin, Pshutayam, are people who blossom and people who grow. You know what happens? When a person is a Pashat Yid, they have the ability to become a Choshev Yid. For being a Choshev Yid, they can grow even more. They can grow even more. They can grow, cause their family to grow. Sky's the limit. The sky's the limit. I think, as was mentioned, this item with specificity was not mentioned. Whenever I had to go to the eye doctor, there was such a dignity, such a special flavor to meet Mrs. Maryles in the office. You could feel what she meant in her hello, how sincere it was, how real it was, how caring it was. Just a simple hello. How are you? How's your life? Simple words from a pasha to Yid, and according to Rav Hutner Zatzal, not contained necessarily even in the Galish. As was mentioned earlier, this as well, there was a special achrayus, responsibility, a feeling towards her husband. Towards her husband. Towards her husband. I would dare to venture that this seed of a Pashta Yidna developed into a Choshev Yidna, which developed into a Jewish woman who became a teacher without ever teaching in a classroom. Because in a certain way, we're all her students. She taught by example, even though she did not teach with the formality of being in a classroom. And now, Mrs. Maryles, you're going on a new journey. And that journey is to Shemayim. We've been told by many of the Gedolim in the previous door, there's a special route and a special place in Shemayim to those people who we call survivors. And I think, who am I to say, but I think those people who are survivors and have this special route, if they are survivors coupled with Emunah Pshuta, which they maintain, the root is probably even more special. She should be zeichet to be a Maryles Yosher for the Mishpacha. She should be zeichet to be a Maryles Yosher for Chicago. She loved. She should be zeichet to be a Maryles Yosher for all of Klal Yisrael. And I think the lesson that perhaps we can take away is that nowadays, many people don't know how to tolerate. My air conditioning doesn't work. My car's not working. My contractor didn't do the job I wanted. The cleaners didn't fix my suit the way I wanted it for her to. Sometimes it's good to remember the Pashta Yid, the simple Yid, who took everything with faith, took everything with Emunah Pshuta, and were able to continue. No, they weren't made out of tapioca. They were made out of pashtus. And that Emunah Pshuta carried them. Perhaps, as Rabbi Matanki said, that Emunah Pshuta can give us the ability and the hope to carry us as well. Bila Amovis, the Netzach, Moch Hashem Dimach Me'alchov.
About 80 years ago, my mother was put on the kinder transport from Germany to Holland. My mother was hidden by a Catholic family who told her to pose as a Christian child. My mother told me that the first time, subsequent times for a while that she went to church, when they told her to pray, she would whisper the Shema. On the day of the stroke, I picked up my parents to take them to the hospital for my father's procedure. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, very serene, with her siddur open davening. She was davening, she sang the Shema. That was my mother. In my 50 years, I don't remember once any time my mother had said Hashem for all the difficulties and hardships that she went through. The Torah Shimon explains the pasuk of Anochi Oimdi Ben Hashem B'nechem. What stands between Hashem and the Yid? It's Anochi. It's the I. It's the Negias that one has. One thing that everyone can testify about my mother is there was no Anochi. My mother's entire life was raising her children, her grandchildren, and making sure my father's every need was taken care of. When my mother got sick, as Rebbe Matinki mentioned, February 15th, I got many calls from various friends, some very old friends, with the same thing. They all called to tell me how they remember Shabbosim in our house, how serene the house was, how my mother welcomed them, how each one felt at home. The vibe of the house. And building a loving home was something that my mother excelled at. This love, devotion, and responsibility didn't just extend to one generation, but carried over for the next generation as well. My mother was 65 when we had our twins, Chaim and Shoshana, and frankly, we were a bit overwhelmed. We then had a singleton Rivka, and the triplets, Mordechai, Shimon, and Bela, within 4 years, and then we were truly overwhelmed. My mother offered to cook dinner for the kids for a few weeks until things would get easier. Those few weeks turned to a few months, and those few months turned to a few years, and those few years turned to 10 years. My mother cooked dinner day in and day out for the children. Not only that, she made special food for Chaim, who was a very finicky eater at that point, except for candy. And all with a smile. That's what she wanted. And frankly, the only reason why my mother stopped cooking after those 10 years was because they didn't have a kitchen anymore. They ripped out their kitchen and didn't addition to their house. So one may ask, why would an 80-year-old, give or take, couple do an addition on their house? Isn't it just easier to move? But it's simple to them. My father had a hard time walking upstairs, so we needed to stay in a house that was, or residence that was on one floor. But they knew that their Eniklach loved being in their home, so how could they move? So instead, they retrofitted their home to make it work, so their Eniklach continued to come there in their 80s. This was my mother. My mother's devotion to my father was simply unbelievable. She literally took care of all of his needs. They had an ideal, respectful, loving marriage, and she's a role model in how to be a good spouse. She gave me the tools to be one myself and my siblings. I only have to choose to follow her path. There's a well-known Gemara in Sanhedrin of Bar Mazaka Avua. A son brings merit to his father. When a person is nifter, they're like a malach, they're eimdim, they're standing in one place. The only way for parents to have an aliyah is through their children's Torah and mitzvahs. The spirits of Netzach and Haid represent legs. And these legs are the legs that are given to parents to push them to higher levels through the learning and mitzvahs of their children. Mother, how many schos do you have? Helping raise your Eniklach. The thousands, and I can say thousands, of lot that they learned Yours close. Chaim closed his Gemara, left the base medrash, and ran home from Eretz Yisrael to be with you when you got sick. The grandchildren were all here. They all come to be with you. Why? Why? Once again, you only had children when you were 65. When you're towards the end of your life. Why? Why did they feel this? They felt this way because there's no anointing. There's no negias. They know you love them. They knew everything you did for them was for their sake and only for their sake. I'd like to finish off by speaking about the day that my mother had her stroke, which I got to spend together with her. As I mentioned, I picked up my parents at their house to take them to the hospital for my father's procedure. In the car, my mother declared that it was time for them to move to Park Plaza so that my father could dine with the minion again, among other things. She was willing to move out of her home, which she lived for 55 years, for my father. Once again, no anointing. When we're in the hospital, we were in the waiting room, she took out a book in the Tehillim, said Tehillim, she's reading a book. And we spent the day there together. At 4:15 p.m., which was less than an hour away from when she had her stroke about 5:10, my son Yehuda called. And she was speaking to him about his schedule and his chavrusas, and he was talking about Banastarim. And she hung up and she commented to me afterwards how proud she was. And she said it was good how much he was learning because he had the capabilities to do so. And when he's capable, he should do. Right afterwards, my mother, as sharp as a whip, asked me about how our youngest son, Ellie's bar mitzvah lessons were going. And I sort of hemmed and hawed and said, he'll start at some point. But, Ben Zakunim, these things. So she said very clearly, I won't forget this, whatever he does is good, and the rest blame on Corona. I asked her, I said, blame on Corona? And she said, yes. I said, today everyone blames everything on Corona. So whatever it is fine, and the rest blamed on Corona. That was it. So these lessons that I got in the last hour are absolutely precious. I understood exactly what she was telling me. Before I end, first of all, I'd like to thank my wife Esther for all she's done for my mother throughout the years, 27, almost 28 years. My mother really loved her like a daughter. And my mother was so worried about my father being taken care of afterwards and being able to go to Park Plaza and she thought with her in general being able to be taken care of. And she stuck around. The doctor said a week. The doctor said afterwards, less than a month, she stuck around until my father was able to move and settle in. That's what she wanted. She had a strength to her. And that happened, and my siblings really helped quite a bit, coming back and forth, helping with my father, helping settling in. And my father knows we'll do anything for him. Mother tried to teach us that. I'd like to just end off by saying that quietly, my wife and I were planning to do Achnasa Sefer Torah, which are commissioned around Ellie's bar mitzvah. And we thought, the family would all be together. And although you won't be there to celebrate with us now, you'll be on the mantle. Which is so appropriate on many fronts. We as a family will try to perpetuate your legacy. May there only be symbols.
The Gemara Katan says, in that Chaf Chesed Maryles, that there's three things that a person does not get from Mazel. And one of them, the Gemara states, is the amount of lives that he lived during his lifetime. Taisus there asked the Kasha on the Gemara about that. There's another Gemara in Shabbos that says that Klal Yisrael did not get anything from Mazel. Rather, Hashem gives every person what he's supposed to get during his lifetime. So how could this Gemara says there are only three things that he doesn't get? But Taisus answers that the Gemara over here is talking about something else. Gemara in Shabbos is talking about regular Mazel. Well, the Gemara over here is saying that there's three things that a person can only get based off susim that he has. My grandmother, Mrs. Maryles, did not lack any susim. She went through the war, she lost both of her parents. She lived with years without a family, yet she still remained faithful to Yiddishkeit. I know she shared her story many times, and probably everyone in this room is familiar with it. But I would like to speak about another aspect that's not shared in the stories. That for all my years, I've been around her my whole life, and all my siblings, she was always sent us so much love and care that, as my father mentioned, she used to cook dinner for us for years. Fortunately, I wasn't born in that span. I was only by the end. I remember back when I was 4 years old, I remember she used to feed us cantaloupe and hot dogs. But even then, from when I was at such a young age, I still remember all the love that she gave us. I always made sure we would eat, even if we didn't want to. We were healthy. She would always make sure that we had what we wanted. Fortunately, her and my grandfather, Shetichia, lived just 1 block away from us. We were able to visit their house any time that we wanted. We usually went twice a week, on Friday and Sunday. We were able to do anything we wanted there, but she always took care of us. She always cooked for us, baked for us. She talked to us. She pampered us. Everything that was possible for her to do, she always was involved. My family and I, along with everyone else who knew her, will always miss her for everything she did, for all her love, care, and devotion she showed to all of us. I know she's in a better place than Shemaim now. That we can still continue to give her nachas. She still knows us, is in sync with us. But along with that, I also have the memories of everything she did for us for all the years. And as we were together in the same block, we were able to spend countless moments together.
It is our honor to call upon Rabbi Moshe Schoenberg to recite the Kabbalah.
El Molei Rachamim, Shoichei Bamroimim, Hamsei Menucha Nechoino, Al Kanfei Hashchina, V'ma'alois Kedoshim Utorim, Kizoyai Harakia Mazirim. Es nishmas chanu bas Mordechai Yisrael sholcho lo'olomo ba'avush anachnu misvalelim be'ad haskaras nishmaso v'gan Eden ve'menuchaso lochein ba'al harachamim yasirel b'seisek enofav lo'olomim Yitzra b'tzrachayim es nishmaso Adonai hu nachaloso v'sonuach b'shalom amishkavo v'noimar amen.
You may be seated for just a moment. This concludes our service here in the shul. The return will be at Eretz Chaim Cemetery in Beit Shemesh on Wednesday evening at approximately 6:30 p.m. To view a live stream of the Kuro, please visit our website at chicagojewishfunerals.com, where it will be posted in just a little bit. Shiva will be observed in Chicago at the Maryles residence, 2955 West North Shore, from Tuesday afternoon through Monday morning. Shabbos will be 8:30, Mincha Marv at 7:35. Please do not visit from 12 to 2, 5 to 6:30, and after 9 p.m. A procession to the airport will be forming just outside the shul. Please make sure to obtain an orange safety sticker for the inside portion of your windshield, as well as a magnetic flag to attach to the roof of your vehicle. Make sure your bright lights and hazard lights are on at all times. Please try and avoid any large gaps while in procession, especially as we pass through intersections. Due to airport safety and COVID regulations, when we arrive at the airport, everyone must remain in their car at all times. As we leave the shul in just a moment, please make sure to exit on the southern end of the building through the North Shore corridor or through the back of the shul and the doors entering into California. I ask everyone to please rise as we escort the family and the rabbi